I married John 7 years ago. We had been together for 3 years before getting married, and everything seemed perfect. John was kind, caring, always supporting me. We made a great couple, but there was one problem that always hung over us: our intimacy. I didn't realize it right away, but after we got married, it became clear that our needs in this area were very different. John was fine with having sex once a week, but I felt like I needed more. I tried talking to him about it. I explained that it was important to me, not just emotionally, but physically as well. I read articles and mentioned that regular intimacy was good for a woman's health, but he just brushed it off, saying everything was fine and that I was overthinking it. His calmness only made my frustration grow. I loved him, but more and more often, I found myself thinking that something was missing. Before we got married, we had started trying to have a child. It was my biggest dream, to become a mother. But years passed, and nothing happened. We went through several medical tests, and I learned that the problem was likely with me. My body simply wasn't working the way it should. I told John about it, but he assured me that it didn't matter to him, that we would have a child if we just kept trying. His calmness again turned into something irritating. I felt alone in this struggle. In 2017, I started having joint problems. I went on sick leave, and to distract myself, I began spending more time with my sisters. Laura and Emily were younger than me and not married yet. They lived an active life, going to parties, meeting people. I rarely joined them before, but now I had a lot of free time, so I decided to spend more time with them. We began meeting at cafes, walking in parks. It was unfamiliar to me, as I had spent most of my adult life at home with John. One day, we went shopping with Laura and her boyfriend Jason. They suggested having a drink outside, just sitting and talking. I agreed. It was then that I first noticed Jason looking at me differently, but I decided not to think much of it. Even though I noticed Jason's looks right away, I tried to ignore them. It was wrong, after all. He was with Laura, my younger sister. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became for me to remain indifferent. Jason was vibrant, charismatic, and skilled in conversation. He complimented me, joked around, and sometimes held his gaze just a little longer than necessary. I tried not to pay attention, but something inside me started to change. One evening, when Laura was busy, Emily, Jason, and I went to the nearest store for drinks. Afterward, Emily insisted on being dropped off at home, leaving Jason and me alone. He suggested we take a walk to talk. I didn't want to, but his insistence seemed sincere. "I need to get something off my chest," he said. "You know Laura better than anyone." We sat in the car near a park, and he began complaining about how his relationship with Laura wasn't going the way he wanted. He said they were too different, that he felt unheard. I tried to calm him, reassuring him that they could work things out. But then everything changed. Jason suddenly leaned in and tried to kiss me. I pulled back, saying it was wrong. He apologized, but I could tell that it wasn't just a mistake. He looked at me with a special expression, and against my will, I felt flattered by his attention. That night, I insisted he take me home, but my thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. Why hadn't I stopped him immediately? Why did I feel anything at all? The next day, I tried to keep my distance, but fate brought us together again. Laura invited everyone to a party, and once again, Jason offered to drive me home. This time, the conversation was much livelier. We talked not only about Laura, but also about my relationship with John. I told him how lonely I felt in my marriage, how I longed for more attention. I didn't know why I was sharing this with him, but at that moment, it seemed like he understood me better than anyone. When he parked near my house, he suddenly suggested we move to the back seat to continue the conversation. I knew what that meant, but still, I did it. In that moment, I just wanted to feel desired, needed. He leaned in to kiss me again, and this time, I didn't pull back. I knew it was wrong, but I let it happen. That night marked the beginning of what lasted for the next 6 months. We met in secret, trying not to draw attention from Laura or my family. I found excuses to spend more time with him. Jason became someone new to me, someone who filled the emptiness I felt in my marriage. But at the same time, I knew I was betraying John, betraying everything we had built together. These thoughts gnawed at me from the inside, but I couldn't stop. Every day, my double life became harder to maintain. At home, I tried to be the wife that John deserved. I cooked dinners, smiled at him, kept up conversations as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was torn apart by contradictions. Every touch, every glance from him reminded me that I was betraying him. The guilt slowly consumed me, but I still couldn't say no to Jason. Our meetings became less frequent, but they were no less significant. Jason always found the time and place for us to see each other. Sometimes it was brief talks in the car, other times meetings in quiet corners. I couldn't explain why I continued seeing him. He wasn't better than John. He wasn't kinder or more caring. But he gave me the attention I craved. With him, I felt alive. But it couldn't go on like this forever. I started to notice changes in John. He became quieter, often looking at me as if he had questions he didn't know how to ask. I knew he felt something was off, but didn't know what. One day he asked, "Are you happy, Sarah?" I froze, not knowing how to answer. I felt that if I said yes, it would be a lie, but I couldn't say no either. Instead of answering, I just nodded, and he didn't ask anything else. Meanwhile, my relationship with Jason began to crack. He became more insistent, more demanding. "Why can't we be together, normally?" he asked one day, when I refused to go away with him for the weekend. I explained to him that I couldn't destroy my life for something that might not last. But he didn't want to hear it. "Your husband doesn't even notice that you're unhappy. Why are you staying with him?" His words struck a nerve. He was right. But I knew that staying with John was the only right decision. In November, everything changed. Jason and I started pulling away from each other. I felt that our relationship couldn't go on. He became irritable, blaming me for not being able to make a choice. I knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier. At some point, I simply stopped answering his calls and texts. I decided it had to end, or I would lose everything. But soon after that, my life took an unexpected turn. In December, I noticed a delay. At first, I didn't think much of it, since my cycle was never regular. But then Laura, unknowingly, pushed me to take a test. "Just check," she said, laughing. "What if it's a sign?" I bought a test on my way home and took it as soon as I got inside. A few minutes later, I saw the result. 2 lines. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was pregnant. After all these years of trying, after all the disappointments, I was finally pregnant. My heart was overwhelmed with mixed emotions: joy, shock, fear. Who was the father? I knew it could be either John or Jason. That thought wouldn't let me rest. I sat in the bathroom, holding the test in my hands, feeling emotions overwhelm me. Pregnancy had been my dream, but now that dream was mixed with fear. Who was the father of my child? John or Jason? A dozen thoughts spun in my head. but I decided not to wait any longer with the news. That evening, I told John I was pregnant. His reaction was unexpected. He picked me up and spun me around the room. His joy was so sincere that I couldn't hold back my tears. He had always wanted children, and now, when it was finally happening, he looked like the happiest person on earth. I looked at him and thought that I had to do everything to save our marriage. John deserved that, but the thought of Jason kept haunting me. Deep down, I knew I couldn't hide my pregnancy from him. I knew the child was probably John's, but I couldn't be completely sure. Jason had the right to know, even if our relationship had ended. After much deliberation, I sent him a message. "I'm pregnant. I think it's John's, but I wanted you to know." His reply came almost immediately. "We need to talk." We met in a cafe to avoid any unwanted scenes. Jason was tense and serious. He said that if the child turned out to be his, he wanted to be a part of its life. I agreed, even though it was weighing on me. But he also added that this could have been easier if I had chosen him. "You should have made a choice earlier," he said. Those words felt like an accusation, and I realized that this conversation had to be the last. I made it clear that I wasn't going to destroy my marriage. "Jason, my life is with John. I'm grateful for everything, but we can't keep in touch anymore." He accepted this with clear disappointment, but didn't say anything. In that moment, I felt like I had finally put an end to our relationship. The pregnancy was difficult. At the end of December, I ended up in the hospital on bed rest. John was there, as always. He supported me, brought me food, helped with anything I needed. His care and love were unwavering. Every day he talked about how excited he was for our baby, how he was planning to set up the nursery. I saw how deeply he loved me, and that love only made my guilt worse. When I returned home from the hospital, Jason started calling and texting. He wanted to know how I was doing, if everything was okay with the baby. But I didn't respond. I knew that any communication with him could ruin everything I was trying to rebuild with John. One day he showed up at the house, but I didn't open the door. I understood that I needed to focus on my marriage and the future of my child. When my son was born, I felt both joy and fear at the same time. John was incredibly happy. He held our baby in his arms, smiling at his face, and said, "Look how beautiful he is, our little hero." I smiled in response, but inside, I felt a tightness in my chest. The baby was perfect, but I couldn't shake the intrusive thought. What if he's not John's? The first days after the birth passed in a fog. John never left my side, doing everything he could to make me comfortable. His love and care became unbearable reminders of my lie. Each day, I saw more and more of Jason in our son. His eyes, the shape of his nose, even his expressions reminded me of the person I was trying to forget. I tried not to notice it, telling myself I was just seeing similarities where there were none, but my heart didn't lie. One night, when John was already asleep, I went to the crib and looked at our baby. In that moment, I realized I couldn't keep running from the truth. The child didn't resemble John. He was a carbon copy of Jason. My heart froze. A wave of guilt washed over me. Everything I had feared had become a reality. The baby wasn't John's. That thought paralyzed me. I held my head in my hands, trying to figure out what to do. Should I tell John? It would destroy him. Should I hide it? I had already done that, but now the lie was becoming unbearable. I couldn't sleep until morning, sitting on the floor next to the crib, trying to find a way out. But there was no way out. I knew that John could never know the truth. Since then, I lived with this knowledge, hiding it deep inside. I decided I would do everything in my power to make sure John never doubted his love for our child. He was a father, not by blood, but by his actions, by his heart. I saw how he cared for our baby, how he planned his future, and I knew I couldn't take that joy away from him. Jason never showed up in my life again. I never told him that the child might be his. It was my secret, my burden to carry until the end. I made the decision to live for John and our son, to never make the mistakes that led me here again. Years passed. John still doesn't know the truth, and I'm not planning to tell him. Sometimes I see our son growing up, and I notice Jason's features in him, but I try to push those thoughts away. To John, he's his son. To me, he's a reminder of the price I paid for my happiness. But I decided that I would love John and our boy as much as I possibly could. That's all I can do.